Crystal Manich, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Andy Wilkowske.
For my first episode of my live stream, I
Amazing.
really don't know what I'm doing or how to interview people, but here we go. So tell everyone, first of all, where you're talking to us from.
Yeah, I have I make my home in Puerto Rico, which is where my whole family is from, and I often came to the island all the time as a kid. So it was sort of my dream to be based here at some point. And 3 years ago, I made that move, and it's nice to be home. I haven't been home for this long, actually, so it's been kind of a really um, unexpected, joyous time.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. Um, okay, so why opera? Like, what first drew you to opera?
It's
Right?
weird because, like, I don't know. I mean, it's funny because people ask me that a lot, actually. And um, I can only be honest and say that, my first passion was the theater when I was 12. Well, my first passion was dance when I was 7. But then when I was 12, I really fell in love with the theater, and I told myself that I would just devote myself to the theater for the rest of my life, not really knowing what that meant. And when I was 15, I saw the play Masterclass by Terrence McNally, who just passed away
Right.
recently, actually. Um, and it's about Maria Callas doing the master classes at Juilliard. It was such a beautiful dramatization, and I had no idea what opera was. And there's what's great about that play is that there's opera singing in it. There's recorded
Yeah.
arias by Callas, and of course her life story is fascinating and very. I mean, it's very easy to dramatize.
Right.
And I just became fascinated with her as a character. And so the next day I went to the public library in my hometown. I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh, and I picked up the first interesting title off the shelf, and they had a Callas section, right? And it was Tosca. It was
Oh
Puccini's
man.
Tosca. So Tosca was the first
Awesome.
opera I ever listened to. I
What
took
a
it.
great first opera to listen to.
Well, because I had been such a musical theater fan, I still am. But I, took the CDs and went to my room and opened up the little booklet that was the little insert. And those opening Scarpia chords, I just went, this is
So
not a
good.
musical. I was like, this is like a different, I thought it was gonna be the same, right? I just
Right.
thought musical theater and opera are the same. And not knowing, at 15, what either one of them was really, how they were different. And and then I just loved the Italian because I spoke Spanish. And so I was like, oh my God, Italian's like Spanish. This is amazing. It's like, I can understand what they're saying. I'm reading it, following along. And I just became obsessed with, like, how do they sing like that? And this is like really heightened drama, and it
Yeah.
takes a long time, and it's really like it was such a different, because musical theater can be so fast paced, and I didn't know anything else. And so it was a beautiful, like, opening up to a new world. And that was my first foray into opera, was just becoming obsessed with what it was. And when I was 16, I decided I wanted to be a director, and I went to my first opera, and it was La Boheme, another Puccini opera, at Pittsburgh Opera, on the Benedum Center stage. And 10 years later, I directed that same production of Boheme
Oh
on
my
that
gosh.
stage.
No way.
Right? So, yeah. So at 16, I looked at it and I went, oh, I really want to do this. And then 10 years later, I did
There you were.
exactly that thing. So it
That's
was,
amazing.
yeah. So lots of interesting synchronicity with opera in my life. And just, I went to school for theater and arts management, but opera was always the thing that I wanted to get into, because I saw an opportunity for heightened drama on the stage, and for maybe a director's voice in that medium that I felt really called to do.
Wow. That's so cool.
Because how do you dramatize? Like, how do you get to the core of a character with such heightened music?
Right.
Right? It's like humanity put up on this pedestal. And so I still, that's what drives me now, 15 years as a professional. Like, how how do we meet that heightened vision of what humanity is, and then counterbalance it with real emotions and real human connections. I mean, I love that. That's been my life's journey, I feel like, in this medium.
Oh my gosh, you put that so well. That is so awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that, and glad you talked about your love of musical theater and
Mm.
dance and stuff, because you work a lot in theater and musical theater
Mhm.
and film and opera and lots of different medium. So, I mean, what is it about opera that makes it different? I mean, you kind of touched on that already, but
Yeah, I think what's funny is that, film came out of opera. Film, the genesis of film was to create, to create in a different way what was already very present in the entertainment. We have to remember that opera was like the film of its time.
yeah,
It was very popular, and people would flock to go to the opera house for the latest opera. And there are a lot of operas that we don't even know about because for some reason or other someone decided that they didn't belong in the canon to be done. So there must be a lot of bad operas that we
all
don't
right.
know about,
It's like
just like there are bad
bad
films,
movies,
bad
right?
TV shows. It's the same thing. It was just as popular. So, think about cinema and talk about heightened. You have music to help the audience feel more than what they're just hearing in the text, right? And
Yeah,
so it's like film is a direct um, descendant from opera. So I find them to be actually, it makes sense that I would like both.
yeah,
And, theater being the genesis of all things, in ancient Greece, always incorporated music. So I think that as storytelling goes, humanity has always been really drawn to both music and text and how those things work together. And opera just happens to fuse them in a way that's different from other mediums. So
yeah.
that's like my best answer
Yeah,
for
no,
that.
right. It's like the biggest fuses them in like the biggest way.
But what's interesting though, like I just did a play recently and I hadn't done a play in a long time. And what I loved about revisiting that medium was being able to, like, I was the enforcer of the pacing.
Oh yeah, right.
Because when you're dealing with music in opera, you get a finite amount of time for this character to travel from here to here if the text deems that they need to travel somewhere, and so there's a finite amount of time, and there's a real excitement about that, about opera. But in a play, you totally dictate the pacing, and you have to be the composer of your own
Right.
pacing of the play. And I really embraced that when I did the play. I experimented a lot with, and even with the musical I just did too, like experimented a lot with silence and, when it was appropriate, and just tried to compose that. And I feel like my musical background really helped with that.
Oh, I'm
How do you
sure.
pace a human drama without music in those, non-musical moments? It's cool.
Having done some musical comedies myself and some operetta and stuff, I find the spoken dialogue to be incredibly liberating, just like what you're saying, because you're in
Yeah.
charge of the
Yeah.
pacing. And I also find it to be incredibly terrifying for the same reason, because I mean, we kind of have it easy singing actors in opera because a lot of decisions have been made for us.
Yeah.
Am I going to
Totally.
be say this line really loudly because there's a three F's in front of it and it's at the
Mm-hmm.
top of my vocal range? Is it going to be super fast? Is it going to be super slow? And you take all that away, and it's like, okay, make something out of this. It can be very daunting, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I think the advantage of working in those different spaces, because they directly inform each other. For me, anyway, I take away lots of things and use them in other projects, and I think it's really great.
Cool. So you are obviously a director. You're a writer. You've been a artistic director. I mean, how do these different roles you play, do they influence each other at all? Do you have a favorite one?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, so many years of working with performers obviously informs how I feel about writing the projects that I'm working on, writing character. And that's, the writing for me is something that's just sort of come up in a real way in the last couple of years. But yeah, definitely. And understanding how, I mean, spending all these years, more than a decade, just exploring storytelling. And of course, that's going to influence how I write and what I feel like I how I should be writing and what I should be writing about. And yeah, I think, you know, when you're leading a company artistically, there are obviously other things to think about. You think about budgeting in a different way than you would just as an artist. Although as an artist, we do have budget constraints put upon us as directors. But, you know, just thinking about the overall vision of a company and what you want to provide to your specific community. I mean, I think that that's what's beautiful about being able to run a company is sort of, you know, understanding the community. Because I do think that communities are really important. And I think still, you know, even through all this COVID crisis, I do see some things being nationalized in terms of people wanting to broadcast, you know, their community work to the greater world. And I think it's really great because it shows that this is what we've done at our company, because we wouldn't see it otherwise, right? But at the same time, I think when we get through whatever this is going to be at the end of this, or at the non-end of it, whatever it ends up being, you know, how do we keep our communities engaged in the same way? You know, and I think that's going to be a real challenge. But I think that, you know, anyone who's running a company, I really applaud them, because I understand sort of that dilemma right now, and you know, how to present moving forward. So
yeah, wow. So if this COVID disaster was not happening right now, you and I would be in Roanoke, Virginia, doing A Streetcar Named Desire together.
Yeah.
And so
we would be, and it would be great.
It would be so much fun, and instead we're on a computer staring at a screen, which most of us are spending a lot of time doing these days.
I tell you what, that has been, I get bleary-eyed around 4 o'clock, and I'm like, I gotta take a break. Yeah,
totally. So you work a lot. Long Beach Opera does a lot of contemporary operas. They also have a history of doing like early music operas, and I know you've one of your specialties is doing Baroque operas.
Yeah.
But you do modern stuff too, I'm sure. But you just did Postino, and so I mean, do those two genres talk to each other at all in your mind? Are they is doing one completely different than doing another one, or is it like two sides of the same coin? Or how
I mean, I do see a lot of similarities. I know a lot of singers feel that way too. And I was trying to think about like why that is. Because I Monteverdi, I love doing Monteverdi. Coronation of Popea was the first opera I ever directed, and it's still one of my favorites. I think it's amazing. It's so racy, and it's so violent, and it's sexy, and it just has all those components. And
it's
you just go
how
1651. 1651, you just go, whoa. Because even today, by today's standards, I mean, if you really stage it with all that stuff that it provides, it would be really maybe controversial. I mean, if you actually went all the way for it. So, but I feel like the way that it's composed and the text and the way, I think that it does relate to contemporary opera a lot, because you have more lines of thought that are, I guess we would call it recit now, you know, recitative, but actually, I mean, you just think about it's spoken lines set to an underscoring of music. And so, yeah, in that way, I see it a little bit, you know, unlike Verdi, for example, where you have these big thoughts that take a while to sort of communicate. I think in the Baroque and in the contemporary, it's more streamlined in that way. And you know, when you get to Handel, it's a whole different thing, because it's not streamlined actually. It is in the recits, but then you get into the arias, which repeat and all of that, and you know, the sections repeat. So you know, I think it did morph at some point in that genre, but yeah, I really love the comparison between the Baroque and the contemporary, and I'm doing more contemporary now, which is great, and I was really looking forward to the Previn, you know, because that's obviously the play. I've lived with the play for so long, and with Tennessee Williams in general. I was in a Tennessee Williams play in college. I've read Tennessee Williams since I was in high school. And so I was really excited to sort of, again, you're talking about plays and operas and how they're different. I was really interested in in seeing the difference between the two. I mean, I think when you and I talked about Stanley early on, I told you how I was doing a direct comparison of the structure of the play to the structure of the opera,
Yeah.
and what the opera took out, and trying to see, how that affected the story. And I was really, I was in deep on that one. I was excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah. There's just so much there to talk about. I mean, your approach to doing something like Streetcar Named Desire, does it? I mean, so is that how is it? This is a stupid question, but like, how is that different than doing Il Trovatore? I mean, like, how
Oh,
is it because
yeah.
it's so much of more of like a play set to music as opposed to a piece of music that has drama in it?
It's so funny. I was thinking of Il Trovatore today for that exact reason. I
Yeah,
haven't done that opera yet. Um, I think it's really challenging to
yeah,
to do a trovatore, because I was thinking about this too. Like, there's so much about opera that's different from plays, in that a lot of operas, especially when you get to the 19th century, the arias talk about the past.
yeah,
And like, so I'm always thinking when I do those works, like, what's happening though in the present while they're talking about the past. And I think in Trovatore, obviously, it's all about the past. That's a story
right,
that talks about, things, mistakes that were made, and to say the least. And so I think that's at least one fundamental difference between something like Streetcar and Trovatore, because in Streetcar it's very active, and it just keeps, driving in a very direct way. And any reflection that's done, it's to serve, like, it's all to serve the moment, right, in both. But it's just the way that it's approached, it's just
yeah,
different, because in something like Verdi, it's like broader concepts and broader strokes, and I think it gets more specific in other more contemporary libretti.
cool. Okay, so I'm a singer.
You are?
I am.
I had no idea. You could have
I
fooled
get
me.
that a lot. Most people don't know I'm a singer. But so, what would you say is uniquely challenging or uniquely rewarding about working with opera singers?
Well, I mean, I love working with opera singers, obviously. I mean, I don't understand anyone who would say that they don't like singers, why they would do this, because it's too hard. I mean, directors, we deal with a lot of different aspects. And for me, the most joyous aspect is being in that rehearsal hall, because you're creating something with all those people that's been in your head for so long. And I love that. So I find it very rewarding a lot, to work with singers, and also because they're amazing. I mean, I get a free concert at every rehearsal, so what's there to complain about? um, I think something challenging, and this is, I mean, I think this is just in general about any working in any art form. It's just the training is just different between actors and opera
Right,
singers.
right,
And
right, right.
I think it's because the opera singer spends a lot of time in a small room with a pianist and a teacher, and working on technique,
Yeah,
and those techniques are so specific, right?
yeah,
Actors are taught to really get into the gut of the thing, and like, how does the gut inform the line, and that it's just a different kind of technique, right? And they do vocal technique obviously too, but it's just a different approach and a different emphasis. And so I think for me, working with opera singers, certainly early on, I was trying to figure out how to marry those two ideas. Like,
right.
how do you, with alignment being a thing, with singing,
Yeah,
with opera singing, and wanting people to be in certain positions, and how do you then connect the voice to the emotion? I That's why I really lean towards Michael Chekhov technique, for opera singers, because, and I sometimes do it, no one really knows I do it, because I just
right.
use the technique while I'm directing. But for me, it's about placing emotion in the body and being
Yeah,
connected to the text, and then making the sound. I mean, I have to say that I sometimes have seen singers make a better sound because they figure out how to be more connected to that word and that note,
a hundred
um,
percent.
through
I took a
emotional
Chekhov class
connection.
I took a year of Chekhov in grad school, and
Oh yeah, because
I
you went to
can
CCM, so
yeah,
they taught that there. Yeah.
and I cannot tell you how it completely just like opened up my mind to a whole different world of how you could approach this stuff. And
It's
I brought it
great.
to my recital rep and brought it
Yeah.
to everything. I mean, because it doesn't require you to. It's not about like what am I doing with my hands, or like it's
No.
all on the inside, and then once it's there, then you use your body. Your body becomes your instrument.
And it just does it
incredible.
naturally
Yeah,
because you're focused in a certain way. And I think what's great about it too is that it makes you rely on your imagination rather than on what Stanislavski had taught before Chekhov, and Chekhov had been Stanislavski's student.
right.
Stanislavski's taught, emotional recall, and you have to have had experienced all these things in order to appropriately communicate. But Chekhov threw that away and said, no, you just need to imagine what it's like to be the Queen of England. You don't actually have to have lived that life. And so that's really, I love that, because I think, as kids, we always used our imagination. So as adults, how great to like still use that to create these worlds,
Yeah.
in these shows. And I that's why I really latch on to Chekhov technique. I find it to be very easy to connect with for singers. Yeah.
So, I'm speaking for myself here, obviously, but I know a lot of us singers think of, when we work with the director, we think of the director as the person who stages the show, and probably a lot of opera patrons think that too. Like, well, they do stage the show, but
Yeah.
there's a lot that a director does. I would say probably a whole hell of a lot more that the director does that we don't know, that happens outside of the rehearsal room. And what is there something that you wished singers knew about you, about your craft, about the craft of directing, that we might not know?
Well, we think about it for 6 months to a year, and we think about it in a way that is very big picture to little picture. So we start with sort of the broad, like, what's the story? Like, that's, the number one thing you always have to go back to. And then, I look at each character, and I don't believe in compromario characters. I think every character matters, and there are no small characters, only no small roles, only small actors. Is that the old phrase? And so, and then you're thinking about also what's the aesthetic of what I want to create? How much money do I have in the budget? What can I create with my design team? Who's my design team? How can we communicate that this is how we want to do? We have to make a presentation to the company. The company sometimes doesn't like what we've done, or they want us to change something, or there are so many deadlines. There's so many things. Like 90% of the work happens before we get to rehearsal.
Yeah, right.
There's so much prep, and that's why I find it so joyous to finally get in the rehearsal hall, because then it just goes, and I'm able to actually create in a really visceral way in the hall, and everything that's been in my mind and on paper is finally comes to life, and it changes, which is also like what I love. Like, we can't really change the set necessarily,
Right.
or change the costumes, because hello budget. But because, once you've conceived it, you sort of have to, be secure in your decisions about that. But the way that I think about characters, I think about them a lot in advance, and then I just see what is the performer that is there going to be able to bring, that changes my mind, or that augments what I've already thought about character. Because I like to give singers lots of freedom to, I give them sort of like you've worked with me, and I give
Yeah, I
sort of like
appreciate that about you. I love
like
that.
an overview of,
Yeah.
if where's the boat heading, and what are we trying to create, and then you guys are free to help fill in the blanks, and of course I'm there to guide. Director should direct, not dictate, right?
Right.
So there's just a difference in how you approach that. And
I really appreciate that about your directing, is that it's truly a collaboration in the room. And I know that you, like you said, you've done so much work. Like, you're in the final steps of realizing this project.
Yeah.
And singers have to prepare too, but it's not the same thing, and so we're doing the bulk of our creating in the room, and
Yeah.
you've done a lot of it before we've even seen you. But it's always a collaboration with you, and you meet us where we are. And a lot of times, if you see what singers bring to the table, it might change, or like you said, augment where
It
the
totally
scene's going.
informs
Yeah,
what
right.
character could be. And I think I love also just seeing what people think they can or can't do, and
Right.
then trying to get what they think they can't do to say, yeah, you can.
What about what happens in after it's staged? What about tech week? Because
Yeah.
that to me, it's like that's when the director really is
Yeah.
the director, not the
Yeah.
person who staged the show,
Correct.
right?
Yeah. It's a lot of work, obviously, and when you have a great design team, it can go really smoothly. But I think, yeah, that's when the entire vision is coming together, and that's where the big picture comes in,
Sure.
right? The singers in the room, that's little picture details, but then in the big picture, you're just looking at so many things and trying to put together so many different ideas. Sets, lighting, costumes. I've done a lot of projections lately in my productions, which like adds a whole other thing, and it affects everything else because technical stuff and also aesthetic, and that's put myself in the seat of the audience, you see.
Right.
So as the director of tech, I remove myself and I just have to look at it and make sure that it's doing the right thing. And so I try to be a clean slate.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where notes come in for singers, right? Because now I'm seeing it for clean slate, and then I go to the singers and I say, I'm seeing this in this way now, a little bit differently. And it's usually like small things, right? It's like character things, it's little ways of expression. So that's it's really, and there is a big picture element to it.
Yeah. Awesome. This is I could go on forever, but Zoom is gonna kick me off here because I don't have a pro account. But before we wrap up, there's a couple more things. I have this thing I'm working on that I want to end each interview with. It's called the Fauci Five. Five sort of rapid, just quick answer questions, just sort of off the top of your head, whatever. Anyway, so do you have a favorite opera or maybe an opera that you think is underrated?
Well, Popea is my favorite opera, one of them. Another favorite that I did in 2014 in Argentina is Adriana Lecouvreur. I think it's very underrated. And I love it because I think what it's about is about a life in the theater and how difficult that is. And I love the music, and I think it's very underrated. It doesn't get produced enough.
Cool. A book or a film about opera that you could recommend?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, I have like a ton of stuff on my shelf, some great, obviously biographical nonfiction stuff, but I remembered, and I had just been talking about this the other day with a singer friend of mine who also loves it, Anne Rice's Cry to Heaven.
Oh wow.
Oh my God. So, and I just realized it was written the year of my birth. And I love it. She talks about singing, and it's about castrati in Naples and Venice. And it's just, I read it like 10 years ago, and I think I might read it again because it's incredible. It's just a love letter to opera and to Italy in general, and the way that she writes. And there's obviously like really over the top soap opera-y aspects to it, but it's so in line with how we imagine maybe that period to be. And I love it.
Awesome. Any other book that you've read recently that you can recommend?
I'm in the middle of The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov.
Wow.
Uh, it's quite something. I'm not sure where it's headed. It's one of the most difficult reads that I've done in years, and it's been on my shelf for a long time. Someone gave it to me. A lot of people swear by it. They say, get to the end, it'll be worth it. And there's references to opera in it, which is cool. It's
cool.
like to Faust and Berlioz and stuff. So it's cool, but yeah, it's very challenging. But man, if you want, I mean, I love Russian literature and all of that. So I am enjoying it, but it's really difficult.
So what are you doing to stay sane right now, or stay creative, since we're all canceled?
Yeah, I am working on some operas that I have for next year. So there's that, but I'm also doing some writing, as I mentioned before, which is great because back burner projects are now coming to the front burner.
Yeah.
And I've also started a new mentorship platform on my website for performers. I'm looking at how to perform with this holistic view rather than just, I need to improve my acting skills, but my performance skills, and how am I living my creative life, and how can I carry that with me onto the stage? And that's I just started that this week, so I'm really
That's
excited.
amazing. And your website is?
crystalmanich.com.
Okay, awesome. I'll make sure to put a link to that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And Final one. What are you watching on Netflix right now, or podcast, or whatever streaming thing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of different things. I like to look at, I'm not a big binger. I can't stand doing that. But I am catching up on The West Wing, which I never
Oh,
watched
nice.
in the late '90s. Yeah,
Awesome.
and I'm really enjoying that. I've been on sort of like an Aaron Sorkin kick lately, just trying to understand like how he writes. I'm just fascinated by
Yeah.
him as a writer. Um, and so that's like the major thing. And I did start The Mandalorian, uh,
Oh yes. Oh my
which
gosh.
and as you know, I'm more of a Star Trek person than a
That's
Star
true.
Wars
I
person.
wasn't gonna say that, but yeah.
We always have this conversation, but I actually find The Mandalorian. I love the story and I love the way they're telling it, and I'm really hyped about it. Yeah,
It's
I love it.
so great. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I might have to rewatch it. Um, so I cannot thank you enough for doing this. You're the best. You're one of my favorite people to work with in the entire world.
Same.
Is there something, a project coming up you want to talk about before we end?
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, I love working with you too, and I really am sad that we're not working together right now because we don't get to work together that often.
Yeah.
So it makes me really sad. So hopefully there'll be something else the universe
Yes.
will put us together on. Yeah, I'm directing a world premiere of this opera called The Copper Queen at Arizona Opera in September, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's a beautiful composition, beautiful words. The composer is Clint Borzoni, the librettist is John de los Santos, and we have an all-female design team, and I'm really just excited about doing that work because I think it's an incredible new opera, and so yeah, that's what we've been spending a lot of time working on right now.
Awesome. Thank you again. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thanks, Andy.
All right.
Take care.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.